Hey, welcome to our final essay. So we just got done with our explanatory synthesis essay where we were synthesizing sources together to build an explanation. In this essay, our argument synthesis, we're going to be synthesizing sources together to build an argument. Now, an argument, despite what American culture and American politics makes it seem like, it's not just attacking each other and yelling at each other. An argument is building a logical, well-supportive, persuasive stance on a debatable topic to try to convince people to agree with you. So, that being said, the only people we ever write a persuasive argument to are the people who disagree with us, right? So, if you already agree with me that Mexican food is better than Chinese food, I don't need to convince you how great Mexican food is, right? We're only ever writing this to the people who disagree with us. So we have to get in their mindset and try to understand what they think about the topic, and also what do they need to be persuaded to come to our side of the fence. So what is their worldview? What are their values? What do they not know? What do they misunderstand? And so we have to get in their mindset so that we can try to give them what they need to be convinced to come to our side. So one of the topics you guys chose at the beginning of the semester was the First Amendment. So I love the First Amendment as a topic because it's very, very important to our daily lives. And a lot of people don't put thought into it, or they don't fully understand what it is. So our first step here is to figure out which part of the First Amendment is most interesting to us, and then figuring out what we want to argue specifically about it. So blog 10 is asking you, well, blog 9 was asking you which part of the First Amendment do you want to focus on. So if you think back to those videos, we have the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the freedom of assembly, and the freedom to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So there's a lot that can be said about any one of these 5 aspects. Even the freedom of speech, you could write a whole book on just one case. So we have to figure out what specifically we want to argue. So in looking at the topics that you guys were putting together for blog 9, we need to make sure, first of all, that our thesis is not a question. Your thesis for this essay shouldn't be, should hate speech be allowed under the freedom of speech? That's just a question. I don't know what you think about it, right? So you have to be able to say, yes, it should, or no, it shouldn't, or these things should, but those things shouldn't. We have to take a debatable stance on this. Your thesis should not just be informative either. It shouldn't just say, the freedom of religion is very debatable and controversial. Well, yeah. Okay, that's just teaching me about it. I don't know what you think and feel about a particular part of this. So when we look at freedom of speech issues, there's all sorts of things like with hate speech, and people you see in they call it the cancel culture. So somebody uses racial slurs against somebody, and then their TV show gets canceled, or things like that. So when we look at freedom of speech, we can talk about the types of speech that are allowed, because we don't have absolute freedom of speech. Hopefully you remember that from the video. There are certain things, I can't just run into a crowded building and yell fire with no repercussion. I can't lie. I can't perjure under oath. If we look at things like libel, we cannot say whatever we want with no repercussion. So we don't have absolute freedom of speech. So you can look at certain issues regarding that. The freedom of religion is very controversial. A lot of people don't fully understand a lot of the freedom of religion controversies. So for example, if we look at freedom of religion in our schools, students are allowed to pray. Students are allowed to wear religious jewelry and clothing and things like that. That's been repeatedly upheld by the Supreme Court. What we can't do is at public schools encourage or demand the participation in religion. So I know my daughter's schools violate that part of our First Amendment all the time. they have the children participate in religious prayer. The school leads the prayer that violates the freedom of religion. Kids can go pray by themselves. They can have an after-school prayer group. The school can't say, okay, all of us pray. They've had my children sing religious songs and do religious plays. This is in public school. That's violating the First Amendment. So should that be a problem? If nobody complains, is it okay? So, and it's not just the freedom of religion in our schools. We look at freedom of religion in our businesses. So the owners of Hobby Lobby don't want to pay for their employees' birth control because, well, the owners of Hobby Lobby think it's a sin to use birth control. So their freedom of religion is conflicting with employees wanting medical care. Of course, this comes up in all sorts of LGBT issues, whether we're looking at adoption, whether we're looking at marriage, the fact that LGBT people don't have equal rights in this country because it conflicts with other people's religions. So there's a lot of things in there. Freedom of the press. So especially in this era of fake news, should I be able to publish anything, even if it's not factually true, even if it's misleading? When we look at censorship laws, not everything is uncensored. So even if we look at people's personal mail, sometimes that can be censored if you're sending things to incarcerated people or soldiers. And when we look at publications, what is deemed obscene, what is deemed illicit, what should be banned. If we look at banned books, that goes along with the freedom of speech. So the freedom of the press is an extension of freedom of speech, right? There's also the right to assemble. So this is us getting together to protest, to assemble, to have our gatherings. So what are the controversies about this? If we look at protesters, what are the appropriate ways to protest? What are our rights with the government coming in and saying you can't be here and disbanding people, things like that. And the right to petition our government for redress of grievances isn't one that we often think about because this in American history was used a lot more in previous generations. But this is our right to say to the government, hey, this is wrong, y'all need to change it. And we can do that through freedom of speech, through assembly, through the freedom of press. So think about how these things impact your life, and they do, whether you know it or not. Even in this classroom, your freedom of speech, you have the right to write a paper, and me and the school and the government cannot punish you for what you say in that paper, right? If I disagree with your argument, I can't fail you just because I don't like your idea. I have to look at the argument and critique it for its value. Does it fulfill the assignment requirements? Is it logical? Does it have good evidence? I can't just say, oh, well, I'm going to fail you because I don't like your idea. So the First Amendment is very, very, very important. And because of that, and it's so controversial, it's just a couple little words. It's like one sentence. But it controls so much of our lives and allows us so many freedoms that there's a lot of potential controversies. If you still don't know, you're like, I'm really interested in freedom of the right to assemble, but I don't really know what I want to say about it. What I recommend is going and doing preliminary research, and you can find an example, a controversy, a lawsuit, a criminal case, or something. So if we look at the Dakota Access Pipeline, when they were protesting this pipeline being built over Native American reservation ground, people were protesting. So then the government came in with tanks, even though they were protesting on their own land. The government came in to disperse the protests. So maybe when I find that, I'm interested and I can make an argument that it should have gone this way, it shouldn't have gone this way. So you can look at old court cases and make arguments about them or their importance, and if you agree with the findings or not, the findings of the court. So Blog 10, what is your specific debatable thesis. It can't be a question. It can't just be a statement. You have to take a debatable stance that people can disagree with. Extra Credit Blog 3 is asking you to consider your intended audience. So if I think, if I agree with Kim Davis to say because it violated her religion to give marriage licenses to queer couples, I'm going to take her side and say, okay, she was within her rights. I have to get in the mindset of my readers who disagree with what Kim Davis did. Okay, so what do they think? What are their values? What are they misunderstanding? What do they not know? Especially in a situation like this where we have her religious rights and these people's civic freedoms, and they're conflicting. So what do we do at the edge of this conflict? Whose rights are more important than others? Because that's what these types of debates boil down to. So get in the mindset of your audience and try to figure out what they need to know and hear and understand to come over to your side of the argument. So that's Extra Credit Blog 3. And then on our final week, Extra Credit Blog 4 is asking you to think specifically about your logos, ethos, and pathos. So what logic are you going to bring in to convince these people? What expertise and ethos? What emotional appeals and pathos are you going to make? So this essay is due our last week, so this will be due on the 6th. So this is like our final exam. So we have to make sure that, yes, I've got all the skills that 102 asks me to do, I can do them. So this is a very important essay, so don't wait until the last minute. Next week we've got Thanksgiving break, so we won't have any blogs due on those days of Thanksgiving break. So, but don't wait until the last minute to get started on this because it is very important to our grade. Make sure to ask me whatever questions you have, and have a good day.